Hello, welcome back to Entertainment ReCast, our podcast version of our YouTube channel, Entertainment Rebooted, where we talk about a variety of different entertainment topics. Mainly, we've been focusing a lot on cinema. So far, our series has really just been like different types of adaptations to film. We're going to continue on the cinema train because we are a bunch of cinephiles, and we're very cynical cinephiles.
And we like to rant.
We love to rant. We love to rant so much.
This is where we rant. We just rant for an hour, and you have to listen to it. Or don't. I don't know. Whatever you want to do.
Or not. Whatever.
Whatever. I don't take it personally. I promise.
Anyway, so today's episode of Entertainment ReCast, we are going to be talking, because we are entering the spooky season, at least when we're recording this. I don't know if it's going to release by October. It should, if we keep up with our schedule. But entering the spooky season, we have gotten to thinking a lot about the Universal Dark Universe, which was supposed to be launched in 2017 with Tom Cruise's The Mummy. And it was supposed to be a reintroduction of the classic Universal Monster series, which we are watching on this channel with our Revisited series, where we watch the classic Universal Monster movies and talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the iconic. Plug over.
Plug over.
So we've been thinking a lot about this. We like to think about film, especially when it comes to failed films, failed franchises, and failed ideas. Because sometimes these ideas actually are really intriguing. They are actually really cool. When they talked about the Dark Universe, for instance, in 2017, I hadn't watched the classic monster movies at that point yet, but I was actually really excited about the idea of the Dark Universe, where they were going to take these classic monster films and they were going to redo them, re-release them, and make them fresh for a new audience. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the Dark Universe was supposed to be, what brought it about, a little bit about the classic monsters, and then let's talk a little bit about the, not once but twice, that Universal has tried to do a shared universe and how it failed both times. And then if we have a little bit of time, because we don't want to take your entire lives away, just a small portion, we will talk about what we would have done to launch the Dark Universe, and how Universal actually could still, in reality, launch the Dark Universe with what they have as of right now.
Yeah, they really could, actually. So to start with, you talked about like we're watching the original monster film. So the Universal monsters were made. Universal is what made a lot of the monsters that we know today iconic. Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Invisible Man, Phantom of the Opera,
Creature of the
Black Lagoon, and there's more. But these creatures and monsters were made famous by the original Universal films and have been redone to death over and over again by many people. Universal has owned the rights to them for a long time.
Well, Universal owns the rights to probably the most iconic versions of the characters.
Yes, they own the rights to the iconic versions of the characters. And this stuff is starting to hit the public domain. So you're starting to see things come back. And Universal made new Dracula films because the original Dracula hit the public domain. So they made Renfield and then the
Last Voyage of the Demeter
in order to keep that.
Yep.
So you can tell that there's a push to like hold on to these properties. And that's the Dark Universe was meant to do that while mimicking the grand success that was the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
The DC Cinematic Universe at the time was in its infancy, so it actually hadn't had a chance to fail yet. And you had things like Harry Potter starting to do the Beasts movies. You had other people are starting to try to mimic that shared universe motif. that they were doing. Star Wars had already done it, so it's worked and not worked in different settings.
Well, yeah, like Fast and Furious tried to do a shared universe of sorts with Hobbs and Shaw.
Yeah,
That's a spinoff. So it's just this idea that's kind of taken hold of Hollywood recently, is the idea of just a shared universe.
well,
and building stories that are related to other properties that you already have that are successful.
and it's smart because you can world build easily. So you can world build early on and then just keep throwing different characters in this world. Star Wars has been doing that for a very long time. They've done TV shows and things even before Disney like Plus started doing. They had like the Clone Wars and other series that were done before Star Wars were sold. That was like expanded universe books, stuff like that, expanded mediums to give life to this universe, because these stories were told inside of a universe you already knew. So it's easy to get into, easy to jump into. You know the lore. You don't have to relearn how things work. You just read the stories in the universe. Yeah. And it's been done in books for a long time. Now it's just being done in films. The television shows have also done it. But film was starting to, Marvel really put it into film, and Universal was like, we could do that. We've got characters. We've got a thing. And the original ones that we've watched almost are a shared universe in a way. Like there's a lot of similar themes, a lot of the same actors play a lot of the different characters that are similar. It's just it almost was already.
It really is a thing of like Universal was one step away from having a shared universe. You change the name of one or two characters and you have a shared cinematic universe.
Yep.
Easy. And the thing is that it's really ironic that like the Dark Universe was supposed to mimic the MCU, which, like, film-wise, you know, Universal kind of made the whole collective shared universe. Think about, like, Abbott and Costello.
Yeah, where they go and meet all the different monsters and the different ones. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all in a shared universe in that sense, but they're like comedies, so nobody really thought about it.
Other shows have done that, like Scooby-Doo has done that, where they have like the Scooby-Doo characters like interact with the different monsters. You have
they run into Warner Brothers properties all
exactly.
the time.
The Warner Brothers did this mix mash with all their different characters many times. You had Universal do this with their cartoons and stuff. It's been done. It's not a new concept. It's just they wanted to mimic specifically the way Marvel did it.
Yeah.
The difference is, and this is DC suffered this too, is Marvel took their time.
Yeah.
They gave all these characters individual films and built them up before teaming them together, which is kind of what Universal was trying to do, it looked like, but they kind of started shoving themes in there really early.
There was so much thrown into that film. Like the Mummy 2017 is a mess.
Yes.
We talk about that a lot as well in one of our other series.
So
Cinema Rebooted.
Before we get too deep in the Mummy 2017, because that's really the focal point of what makes this what it is. There's a few films we kind of really have to talk about that help set the modern tone for these characters, and that's one of your favorites, 1999's The Mummy.
You're talking about the perfect film of all time.
The perfect of all time.
Starring none other than America's sweetheart, Brendan Fraser.
Brendan Fraser. Oh gosh, it's like Scrubs. It's Night Shyamalan. I think it's M. No, I know him. He says it's Ma. It's Night Shyamalan.
Like I overthink how to pronounce his name now because I've always said Fraser, like Brendan Fraser, but it's actually like Fraser, like Fraser.
It's Fraser. He doesn't get to choose his own name.
I know, but it's so I overthink it now. But anyway, so like The Mummy 1999 is probably one of my favorite films. It's just a fun film. Is it like the greatest film of all time? Probably not, but it's fun.
It's a trilogy of films that has some of the lowest ratings on Rotten Tomatoes for critic score versus a high audience score.
Yeah.
Like the audience score for those films is insanely high, and each one takes place 10 years after the original, which is an interesting concept too. But those films are fun, and it brought back The Mummy, which is one that hadn't really been touched in a long time.
Oh yeah, and The Mummy is probably one of the Universal creatures that, like, we've watched 6 films so far. Of all the ones that we've touched, The Mummy was probably the stalest. So the fact that they made like this
It
fun
was the
action
stalest,
adventure,
but it was also one of the more original ones too. So
Yeah.
it had a lot of potential that they didn't give it.
well, it did, and we haven't watched all of them through all the way. It's a continuing series, and the Mummy will show up probably 3-4 more times in the series.
I know
that
at
we
least
have.
2 because there were a couple more. Yeah,
Yeah, there's like the Mummy's Hand, the Mummy's Curse, and then Abbott and Costello
yeah.
meet the Mummy. So at least 3 times. But at the same time, when people think of the Universal monster movies, they don't always think of the Mummy right away. And little do they realize that the Mummy 1999 is pretty actually heavily influenced by the original Mummy movies that Universal made.
Quite a bit. When we watched the original Mummy, it was actually quite interesting how much there is. Where it's Imhotep, he was a priest. He was betrayed because he betrayed the king.
Yep.
Like, it literally follows a very similar plot, and he's trying to resurrect the princess using someone else as a step in. Like, that's literally the plot of the Mummy.
There's hints of reincarnation, which get touched on more in The Mummy Returns.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that Stephen Sommers, the director of The Mummy Returns, he only directed the first 2. The third one, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, is really highly unrelated to the first 2, other than the characters. If you really think about it, the tone's a little bit different, and they go to a different area. Anyway, I could rant about that for hours. But so The Mummy and The Mummy Returns both were like extremely successful, and so Universal gave Stephen Sommers the reins for a massive project, and this idea that he had was to create a series of movies with the central character being Van Helsing. And he created his own unique character who shared the name of the iconic Van Helsing, the dragon slayer hunter guy from the Dracula novel that got carried over into the Dracula movies in Universal. And he made Gabriel Van Helsing, who's different than Abraham Van Helsing. And as a result, he created 2004's Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman. So that film was actually meant to be the beginning of a series, and it was supposed to be a shared.
Oh, and it definitely
universe.
feels like it too. Like it.
Yeah.
That was like, yeah, it feels like, because there's so many unanswered questions that they hint at in the film that they don't get to, and it's very open ended.
Yeah, it was meant to be at least a trilogy. If I recall reading right, Stephen Sommers intended for it to be like a trilogy, and it was going to touch on even more of the different lesser known creatures in the Universal film.
I honestly kind of wish it had, because despite that movie's flaws, it's still a fun film, and it would have been really fun to see that like thrive.
Yeah.
Maybe them clean up or learn from that one a little bit better, because that one of the most iconic scenes of that film that I didn't know at the time. We talked about this a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Is it does a lot of like reshoots, like recreations of the film moments from the original films. Mm-hmm. So the opening film is in black and white, and it shows Frankenstein creating his monster, and it's very much in line. Now it takes a little bit from one of the later Frankenstein iterations than this one, but it's a lot from it. And the death in the windmill with him with Frankenstein is straight up there. The Dracula's like in his 3 wives, and like the dynamics there with Transylvania is there. The castle is kind of a recreation of Dracula's castle. Frankenstein's castle, like there's so much there that's just really iconic that throws back to the original films.
Right.
Takes the ideas of those monsters and juxtaposes 3 of the Universal monsters into one film: Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman. Yeah. It puts all those together in there. It does a really good job of it actually giving a reason for them being there.
Yeah. Like it
doesn't handle the plot very well, but it does a good job of putting them together.
It's a fun film. It's just messy.
Yes.
But
it's like the first Universal. It's the first time all of them were like put together that way.
Yeah, exactly. And it was meant to be a series, but it wasn't received as well as Universal had hoped. I don't think it was actually a flop financially. It didn't do as well as they hoped, though. So the idea for a shared universe was scrapped. and it would remain scrapped until 2017's The Mummy. In 2015, when they started developing The Mummy with Tom Cruise, they got the idea of, let's recreate all of these historical films that we have, because we're talking, what, 25, 30 years of film that they have in, like, regarding the Universal monster movies.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it's almost 30
because it was like
years.
1931 through like 1965.
Yeah, I think so.
It was like the last one of the what's considered the classic monster movies before they started remaking them.
Yeah.
Because after 1965, they started remaking them. They remade Frankenstein. They remade Dracula. They started remaking them into other, and doing a new ones. That was the last of what's considered the original monster films. And then they started, after they started making a lot of the new age ones and remaking some, and then doing continual stories. Through the 60s through like the 80s, and then the 90s they did the Mummy, which was like the modern era where they did Mummy Returns, and then Van Helsing.
Yeah. So they decided that they were going to reshoot these films, and they were going to create the Universal Dark Universe. And unfortunately, they decided that the way to launch that was in 2017's The Mummy with Tom Cruise. That film is an absolute mess. It is a mess of a film, and the biggest issue that it has is how much it tries to create this shared universe idea without it feeling earned, if that makes sense.
I feel a big misstep was starting with. I know why they did it. They started with The Mummy because 1999's The Mummy was so popular.
Yeah.
That's what modern audiences attributed to Universal Monsters, was The Mummy.
Yeah.
And Van Helsing didn't really hit it up hard enough. And so they felt The Mummy was a good place to start. I honestly think a better place to start would have been much like Marvel did, and do more independent features that stand alone well. And you do Dracula, Invisible Man, Dracula, Invisible Man, Wolf, and then The Mummy.
Yeah, maybe something like that would work.
Because you do the ones, the Mummy one, the Brandon Fraser's Mummy was an epic, like, big scale film.
Yeah.
And that you can tell 2017's The Mummy tried to copy some of that, but without the humor.
Oh, yeah. The film has some humor in it.
It
but
does.
Only from, like, one character, really.
Yes. And it doesn't... The Mummy was silly in its premise, but still fun and had stakes. The 2017's The Mummy does the stakes and all that without the goofiness, which actually makes it sillier, because it makes it less believable, because it takes itself too seriously.
It takes itself way too seriously.
Which would work if they had other darker films first.
Yeah.
If you had like these high stakes Dracula film and The Invisible Man before The Mummy, I feel like the tone would have worked a little better. But it's like it's trying to copy 1999's The Mummy out of nowhere while also establishing a universe. It's hard to do when you don't have other serious films to set it apart from. You needed a buffer. You needed a buffer between The Mummy between Brandon Fraser's Mummy and 2017's Mummy. You needed a buffer there,
like
so
a
that
more
you didn't try to.
one, yeah.
Yes, you didn't attribute those films directly to each other, because that made it hard to do.
Well, and everybody was kind of expecting that. You know, they just kind of were. The dynamic that they had with the two main leads, like one of them was kind of goofy, one of them was more serious. You could kind of lean into maybe they have a campy feature.
Well, and Tom Cruise's like character in that film was kind of I've watched him in a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
you know, he's been in all of the every single one of the Mission Impossible films, and he's good in those. He's been in he was in that was it Live Die Repeat? What was the name of that film?
It was Live Die Repeat.
Edge of Tomorrow.
Edge of Tomorrow.
Edge of Tomorrow was the name of the film. Edge of Tomorrow. Like, he was compelling in those films and believable as a character. In that one, he just felt like a character, but he still did okay. I think, like you said, what really hurt it is them trying to shoehorn the universe in too soon.
Yeah. Well, and also the thing is, like, they threw in, let's see, in that film they tried to introduce Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yep.
a secret society dedicated to hunting down supernatural monsters.
Yes.
The Egyptian mummy was tied into the Crusaders
Yep.
that were in an underground subway tunnel in England, which triggered something, as well as having something triggered in not Egypt, but I believe it was Iraq. He was in Iraq.
Yes.
Where he found the body.
Yes, or Afghanistan. He was in the Middle East.
Yeah, he was in the Middle East.
I can't remember which
somewhere.
one, but he was in one of the two wars going on at the time, yeah.
Yeah.
It was actually Afghanistan.
Was it Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think so, because he was up near... Yeah, I think it was.
I don't know, but Iraq is closer to Egypt.
Well, that was the thing. It was weird. They literally say, what are you doing? What is this artifact doing all the way the frick up here?
Yeah.
It was a big deal, because it was way... None of the film takes place in Egypt.
Yeah, none of it, except the intro.
That's true, the intro. But literally none of the modern parts take place in Egypt. It's in the war zone in the Middle East, and then in England.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like, it's so weird, because the original Mummy film takes place in Egypt almost exclusively. The entire film is there.
Yeah.
And then the second one starts out in London and takes place mostly in London because that's where they are at the time. But that makes sense
but they're traveling back through Egypt.
Yes, and they go all the way back.
Yeah.
The third film is the only one that kind of takes place in a completely different place, but that's fine. They've established
It's a different mummy entirely.
Yeah.
It's not even a mummy really. I'm going to go someplace where there are already mummies, like Peru. Later on, mummies were discovered in Peru. That was a great line. That's the kind of thing that made those films iconic. It was kind of silly and fun. 2017's The Mummy is very grating, and it kind of almost encompasses the ideas. It just doesn't do it very well, and I do honestly feel, you could even have made the film exactly as it was. Oh, no.
Well, hear me out. It's not great. It needed to be fixed. But here's the thing. If you were going to have the film like that, if you'd have had 3 other films before it, establishing this secret order, like you have the first one be Dracula, the most iconic one to start with. That's where they originally started with. And you have Van Helsing deal with Dracula, and Van Helsing kills Dracula, and you find out Van Helsing's part of an order. And then you have Frankenstein creating his thing, and then it shows like the modern times the Frankenstein monster is still around.
Yeah.
Like he's still around, and it's the organization that Van Helsing's part of chasing him. And that's when you find out that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde is part of that organization. So those two get introduced earlier. Then you have The Invisible Man, which is kind of a standalone film where being chased, and it's slowly tied in. And then by the time you get to The Mummy, the Dr. Jekyll, you may still not know he's Jekyll and Hyde, but you at least know, you already know the organization's already been introduced.
And the organization in and of itself is eccentric and kind of campy.
Yeah.
So it ties into that. See,
and then you don't have to spend a third of the Mummy film introducing these characters and people because it's already been done.
Yeah.
And then you can focus more on the Mummy thing, because there are some really interesting parts of that film. The Mummy, when she's like trapped in the organization and she's like taunting him, and he can hear her in the head, that was really cool. And when you start to realize their connection, the Mummy's history, the Mummy herself was interesting. The way that they bring her in is convoluted. Like the plane crash scene where he like dies and then pops out of the bag. That was interesting. That was cool. Those were the cool moments. The only time the movie really gets stagnant is when the organization gets involved, because they're trying to introduce them. If they've already been introduced, then them coming in doesn't feel as harsh.
Yeah.
It's like when S.H.I.E.L.D. comes. It's in Marvel where S.H.I.E.L.D. is heavily prevalent in the second Iron Man film. It's not jarring because they've already been introduced in the other ones.
Yeah.
They're heavily in Thor too. In Thor, they're a big part of Thor. Think of Thor was the first film, and S.H.I.E.L.D. was like heavily part of that.
That would be too much. Like Thor doesn't stand alone.
No, and it's an okay film, but if that had been the first one,
it's an okay film in the universe. It's not okay by itself.
I watched it again recently. It's actually not too bad by itself. Even it has some sort, but
just imagine it alone.
I did. It's actually kind of interesting because the first 2/3 of the film almost take place in Asgard, so it's not even on Earth. But then when they get there, S.H.I.E.L.D. is really heavily present. If you did that with that movie, if you started with Thor, that'd have been jarring as heck, and the universe would have stalled instantly.
That's what I mean. Like it doesn't stand alone by
Right.
itself. Like
But
it's a good movie, but it doesn't stand alone by itself. It's kind of like
that's my point about The Mummy.
Yeah.
If it had had other films built before it, it actually wouldn't have been as bad.
that's true. But
It's still rough, but you could keep the film as is. If you had 3 films before it, it would significantly soften the blow. But not only that, if you had 3 films instead of beforehand, it also would not have been as bad.
See, here's another thing too, though. The Mummy 2017 just bites off more than it can chew. Think about it. That film is a good film, but it doesn't have a great focus. It doesn't have a good tone. It makes a very confusing universe.
Yes.
Because think about this. It has amazing horror elements. The crows, like the cloud of crows flying through.
The Mummy is
the
amazing.
C-130.
All the scenes the Mummy are in are excellent.
Yeah.
When they find her in the plane crash and she's like all twisted.
Exactly. And it's all in the
It's
background and it's gothic.
and goric.
Yeah.
And it's a very hard reminder of the original Dracula, where it was that mysterious, monstrous nature. Epic. What ruins that film is they throw too much into it.
Okay. But here's the other thing, though. Like, not only do they do like these great, intense horror shots, they have an overly campy curse. So the sidekick is cursed and he's campy, and it could work. I mean, it kind of ties in with the gothic thing because he is cursed. He's like, oh, by the way, yeah, I'm following you around because I'm dead and it's your fault and you're cursed, but I'm part of your curse, kind of thing. Like that kind of works, but their dynamic at the beginning doesn't really work. The character itself isn't like super sympathetic. It tries to be an action film. Like whenever Tom Cruise is doing something, it's too much of an action film.
It tried to be Brendan Fraser's. Remember Brendan Fraser?
Yeah,
it
tried to be Brendan Fraser's The Mummy without it being a campy adventure. It was just an action film, a modern day action film with the action sets. But here's another thing,
with the gothic horror Mummy,
yeah,
juxtaposing against it.
So it's like 4 movies crammed into each other.
Yeah.
It has this amazing horror shots, generic action shots, really eccentric secret society of supernatural people trying to shove in as many cameos as they possibly can from the shared universe that doesn't technically exist within the universe it's supposed to be set in, right? And then on top of that, oh yeah, by the way, Tom Cruise straight up gets superpowers at the end. It's a superhero film.
That's true, actually. Yeah. Well, that was an interesting and cool twist, making him the Mummy. But the problem is they were making him like a bit like
It's confusing.
It's confusing because the Dark Universe made it sound like these monsters were going to be the enemy, but they had one of them turn into the hero. So is it going to turn into? It literally was almost Marvel. Like, are they going to have all of the? Is it going to be like a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen where they gather all the monsters and turn them into a superhero team?
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's what it started to feel like. Like I said, if this movie came later, is it going to make the movie better? No, but is it going to make it easier to swallow? Yeah, yes, because if you had 3 other films, or like you have a Dracula film and Dracula actually goes down and Van Helsing's the hero, then you have Frankenstein's monster, who's like misunderstood, and the organization has him like chained up, and then like at the end of the film, and then you have the third one, the Invisible Man, who's like straight like a serial killer, where the every one of the characters, their alignment is still ambiguous. Yeah. Some of them are evil, some of them are good. There's no consistency. They all exist in the same universe. The secret society is what ties them together. Then you get to the 4th one with the Mummy, and one of them actually turns good, and there's like a twist. That's a twist now instead of being confusing setup.
Yeah.
They also may have just gone a different route with that. Like I said, it works better if the Mummy isn't the first one you do.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is that
if it's the first one, it had to be a different film. If it's going to be the way it was, they had to have put some in front of this that set the tone better.
Well, it builds a universe that is too confusing in and of itself. Is it a horror film? Is it a superhero film? Is it an action film? Is it an eccentric supernatural shared universe film?
Yeah.
Like, it's too many things all
But
thrown
like you
together
said, if you have
once.
3 films before that set the tone, you know which one of those is supposed to be. You know which
Yeah,
one's
I
the
mean-
outliers. You can have multiple genres in a film as long as you know which one's the outliers and which one is the main theme. Because that was
Yeah.
the first one, it was 4 different genres, and you're like, which one is the shared universe trying to be?
Yeah, exactly.
Are they
like,
putting these together as a superhero team? Is he the outlier and the other he'll be hunting the other monsters? Like, what the frick? But if you have more movies ahead of this, then you're like, oh, this is a horror film. The outlier is he becomes a superhero. That's not normal. They don't normally do that. Or the other ones were that way. Dracula gets recruited, whatever. They're all the Avengers.
Oh,
you know,
God.
that would be stupid. But you know,
I'm sorry, the Monster Mash meets the Avengers is the worst idea ever.
I agree.
It's
But
an
my
awful
point is, at least
idea.
you would know which movie it's trying
I
to be.
guess. It's just,
But I say you start with Dracula. That's how I fix it the way it was. I fix it like this. I go back to make the universe work. Is the first film I make in the series is Dracula. And it's classic Van Helsing hunting Dracula. How you do it, you choose whatever you want to do. But you make Dracula the first one. And then Van Helsing goes home to his secret organization.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. Much like they did with the Van Helsing film, but instead of it starting him with the organization, you don't know he's part of the organization till the end, and you name it.
Mm.
Then you have a second one. I actually would do this. I would do the Invisible Man second.
okay.
The reason is because the Invisible Man is modern. Because you're going to mix the classic monsters, right? These are all the classic monsters. Some of them are going to exist from the past, and some of them are going to be in the present. So Dracula is an ancient horror, and comes to the modern time.
Okay.
He survives to the modern time. Van Helsing takes him down. And it's not the original Abraham Van Helsing. It's like a descendant. Like Dracula, you have it where Dracula survived and he has to go take him down at the modern Dracula. Because you're going to do it in modern times, that's how you have to do it. Which I don't mind doing a modern take on them. That was actually kind of interesting. So then the second was The Invisible Man. And it's a lot like the Invisible Man film they actually did. He's just a serial killer and he's losing his... It's a lot like the original one. He's psychotic. He's losing his mind. And the organization is hunting him down. It's like agents hunting him down. And
Of course they're hunting him down because even the moon fears him.
yeah, right. But it starts out with him like accidentally creating himself, and then like him like losing his mind, and then it's them chasing him down, and it's just another film, and it's that same organization. So the organization itself is now a character in the universe, much like S.H.I.E.L.D. is in Marvel.
Okay.
You don't have to be specific about who runs it or anything. The next one you do is Frankenstein.
Okay.
You have Dr. Frankenstein create the Frankenstein monster back in the day. Like it was. Like it's like 18, 19, like mid-1900s, like earlier time frame.
Mid-1800s, yeah.
Yeah,
It was
earlier time
like
frame.
Early 1800s.
And they think he's dead. And then he survives to modern times. So you do the original film premise of the monster, and then the organization is hunting him down. Because now they're like, these monsters don't deserve to exist. These things should have lost the time. These aren't right. So the organization is hunting ancient monsters, ones that they knew about, ones that are known about, like Frankenstein monsters. Like these aren't fairy tales or stories in this world. These things really existed. Like you can even have the books on these characters be biographical rather than fiction. And so the organization is hunting these beasts, and they find out that Frankenstein is still alive today, and go to take him down. And they capture him, and it ends with him like in their capture. So they've killed the first two, are straight evil. Then you have Frankenstein's monster, which is much like the original film. Is he good? Is he bad? Is he just a force of nature? We don't know. We're just going to chain him down and not worry about him. Then you have the Mummy film come along, where with the organization becoming a stronger character in the film, because the Mummy is the biggest threat they face so far. She comes in like just like in the film, like wreaking havoc, bringing plagues, destroying everything, and then it ends with him gaining her abilities, and he goes on the run, and you don't know if he's now the Mummy or if he's good or bad, and it's left in the open. And then you have the next film in the series is the Avengers film, where it's the organization hunting down all the monsters that they don't have. Like, or maybe you even have it in the Frankenstein one, he gets away. Maybe Invisible Man and Frankenstein. Invisible Man gets away. You don't catch him. And Frankenstein. Oh man, I want to go back. I have a better idea for Dracula. You make it the Dracula the original time frame with Van Helsing killing him, but you make it look like he may have survived.
Okay.
Like they did with King Kong Skull Island, where they're like, this is the Monarch organization is involved.
Yeah.
You do like, this is that organization back in the past, existed all the way back then. And then Invisible Man is a modern movie. So you do Dracula, and then you do Dracula in his time frame. You do Frankenstein in his time frame, with the organization being involved, and then Invisible Man is modern.
That could be interesting.
So you bring it to the modern times, and then that's how. And then at the end of the film, there's a hint that Dracula's still alive. And then, so the rest is the same. You get to the Mummy. And the Mummy thing happens, and at the end of the Mummy, he gets away, and then the organization like, is he friend or foe? And they're like, we'll find out in time, but right now we have someone bigger to deal with, and it's confirmed Dracula's still alive. And then the next film is like the organization is the character, and they're hunting down all the monsters that are still around. So they're like going after some of the ones that they didn't give backgrounds for, the Wolfman. They're going after the Wolfman, Dracula, he's still alive, and maybe you have a couple of you have some of the other monsters like they're dealing with, and you can even have the Mummy character like him be kind of like an anti-hero where he's like helping them, but he's like resisting his curse, much like Jekyll and Hyde is part of the organization. You have that nature like battle internal thing because they're quirky, like you said. It's a weird organization. You're not really sure what their motives are. And you just, from there, you can do whatever you want. You can do all kinds of fun stuff. You can bring in more monsters to it. You can do a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen where you have the monsters. You like basic, or well, actually a better motif would be the Suicide Squad, where you like force them to do your bidding to like take a bigger threat. Like, oh man, we thought Dracula's bad. There's Nosferatu. Turns out he's not Dracula. He's a different character entirely, and they need this team to take down him. It's like the demon of the dark or something, or like some greater villain or something. You could do something fun, or you could just make it. It's odd because the shared monster universe is hard to conceptualize as anything other than like how Marvel did it, the way they were trying to do it. You know what I mean? Like that, you could tell that's where they were going with it. But it would have been more fun to do like we saw with the old films, where they just have the character, the heroes of this, like Van Helsing's in the same use, taking out the monsters. Yeah. But I like the idea of a couple of them. Like, even in the old films, you see that. Not all of them are just straight evil. Mm-hmm. Like Dracula is evil. His daughter is conflicted. But Frankenstein is just a child that's just been born out of unnatural circumstances. Right. And the Invisible Man lost his sanity due to the effects of his serum. And then you have the Mummy, who was selfish in what his motives were. So you could easily turn some of them into. It would be interesting to see some of them change sides.
Yeah, it could be interesting
over time. That's what I would have done with it. Honestly, I don't know what their plan was, because it does look like they were trying to make the Monster Avengers is literally what it looks like they were doing, and that's a bad idea.
It's an awful idea.
That's not. You're just doing what the Marvel already did, but with Universal Monsters. It's just a weird take. So this is Marvel has literally done that with the Howling Commandos. Yeah. You literally have Blade, who's supposed to be the Dracula, and then Werewolf by Night, which is the wolf, and then you have the Living Mummy. And
then they have an actual Frankenstein-esque character, don't they, too? Or am I thinking DC? DC has a Frankenstein.
That would be Solomon Grundy.
Well, no, they actually have Frankenstein.
Oh, I don't know they actually have Frankenstein.
Yeah, he actually has a team.
But the Howling Commandos is literally the Universal Classic Monsters in Marvel Comics as heroes. Like, that's a thing. Like, and it's actually kind of fun and silly and campy, but it's Moon Knight has also been with them and some other characters too. But it's just a very interesting like dynamic there. I don't know that would work with just the straight Universal monsters. It'd be way more fun to have a dynamic universe where all the monsters exist in the same universe, like what they tried to do with Van Helsing. Do what he tried to do with Van Helsing, but better, cleaner. And instead, they did something entirely different. I don't know what it was, and it didn't work.
Yeah. All right. You know how I would handle it?
Yes, you have the floor. Go.
Okay. So I'd handle it this way. Universal, let's just say Universal gives me a call. Yo, random YouTuber guy. Write us a universe.
Write us a universe.
Here's what I would do. I would take the ending of the Voyage of the Demeter. Take the ending. Next film opens up. The main character of The Last Demeter, the Doctor, wakes up in an insane asylum. He's gone insane trying to find Dracula. Because Dracula no longer looks like Dracula.
The Last Voyage of Demeter would be a great opening to the dark universe.
Yeah. So he's gone insane though, trying to find Count Dracula and convince people that Count Dracula, who he doesn't actually, they never say his name, do they? Did they ever say Dracula?
No, she does.
She does. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, the girl does.
Okay, but he's trying to convince people that this Dracula
we call
character,
him Dracula. That's, yeah.
Yeah. He's trying to convince people in London that this Dracula character is like this horrible, insane monster, to the point that he gets thrown in prison. And when he is in prison, he runs into Renfield. And Renfield fills him in on the beginning of the Dracula story. Because Renfield's already been driven insane, but he was sent to London earlier to make the accommodations for Dracula. And when Dracula drew near, his brain entirely shattered. So he's in the asylum at the same time. And he fills him in on flashbacks of like, this is how the story started. My friend Jonathan Harker and I were here. I don't know what happened to Jonathan. When I left, he was surrounded by the brides of Dracula or whatever. And I got sent to make preparations for my master and blah, 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 blah. In the asylum, the Doctor character runs into another respected doctor, a Dr. Van Helsing, who believes the Doctor character and thinks he's perfectly sane. My Van Helsing would be played by either a middle-aged actor like Brendan Fraser, or just go down this trail with me, Andrew Garfield.
I could see that.
Okay. Dr. Van Helsing, played by Andrew Garfield, is now the main character of the film with the Doctor and Jonathan Harker.
Yeah, so you basically do the before and after the Demeter in one film. He explains what happened before and then after, so that's the original Dracula film around the Demeter.
Yeah, so Van Helsing gets the Doctor character out of the insane asylum, and we kind of follow the end of Dracula. And the entire time we're seeing that, you know, this Dr. Van Helsing guy isn't just like a one-off expert of vampires. He's more of like a supernatural enthusiast of sorts.
I just realized that was the other monster that was in the Van Helsing movie. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde was in that one too.
Yes, he was.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
he's like he's kind of not really eccentric or anything like that, but he studies the supernatural as though it's real.
Yeah.
And he brings forth like medical evidences
That
and things like
open-mindedness of the character in the original.
So he plays it a lot like the original character, the original Slay King, if you will.
The original Slay King.
But you continue on and you finish the story in kind of like a mixture, classic way of the 1931 film and the novel. And it's a satisfying conclusion, kind of like what we talked about in Revisited. At the end of that, though, the Doctor's like, well, now that he's gone, nobody believes me. People still think I'm insane. I don't know if I'll ever gain credibility again to just become a regular doctor knowing these things exist. And Van Helsing will be like, well, of course you're not going back to normal things. You're useful in this world. I need your help. The world needs your help. And they join together and they're like a team. And I'll establish a shared universe where either Van Helsing appears as the help for these different monster situations, or the Doctor character will show up as help.
So you would do it in the original time period. You wouldn't even turn it in modern times.
Yeah, I would do it in the original time period, but here's the thing. As the story progresses, time continues to go on. So after, Demeter's 1897, correct?
I think something like that, yeah.
Okay. 1897, I would then have a couple of monsters. Maybe he runs into like Jekyll and Hyde. They try to recruit him at first, but then they find out that he's actually the monster. And then maybe while they're in London, they also run into the Werewolf of London, and I would do that character justice in a way, like introduce the werewolf curse as like a side.
That would be actually a fun way to do it, where you take some of the lesser known characters and you pot them in the background during the major battles.
Yeah. And then while things are progressing in that way, I would have like World War I happen. And the characters kind of get thrown into this weird world, like World War I scenario where like there's monsters and things like that. And it's like the backdrop. And at the end of World War I,
that's kind of like Predator, where it's like in the Vietnam War or whatever, they're being like hunted.
Yeah.
So it's like a monster film that takes place during a historic moment.
Yeah. So like that would be kind of how it is. And maybe like right before World War I, they deal with like the different political tensions and situations and stuff. And Dracula's daughter becomes like a major political force. And they don't kind of realize like where they've seen her before, or they understand where she's come from. Like maybe she's like a political force, and that's the plot of that movie. World War I just kind of happens. And at the end of World War I is Frankenstein's monster. And he's like, the creature is made from the friend of Dr. Frankenstein, who he lost in the war, and he was trying to bring him back to life. He's trying to unlock like life and bring about justice in that way of bringing the dead back to life.
So you're moving towards modern times.
Yeah. So
with all these films.
I continuously move towards modern times. The Mummy takes place at the height of like the whole Egypt movement in the 1920s. And I kind of do like the Mummy 1999 in a way that fits into the universe with Van Helsing and the Doctor character. And maybe even Dr. Frankenstein to an extent. Like maybe Dr. Frankenstein goes to Egypt because he's trying to unlock the secrets of eternal life.
There are so many better ways to do this than the way that they did it.
Yeah, but like this is literally just like top of my head kind of stuff. But
well, I like how you chose a similar path. Like, do Dracula first. Like that was the one we both agree on.
Yeah.
Do Dracula first. Do the most iconic one first. We both know exactly why they did the Mummy first, because Mummy 1999 was the one that was really successful most recently before that.
Well, and they wanted Tom Cruise, and I bet you Tom Cruise was like, I want to do a fun film like The Mummy.
Which is fine. Yeah. They just should have done Dracula first.
They should have.
And it looks an awful lot like they're trying, and I wouldn't mind. They've done this before in films. If they do bring back the Dark Universe, where like Tom Cruise's character shows back up in it, you could do a callback to the film without having to reference it completely.
Oh, sorry, I just had like
I
had an epiphany.
You could have like them, because they did the Demeter. Like you could have them bring back like this Dracula universe and do stuff with it, and then have freaking the organization, all that stuff, and then have Tom Cruise show up as the Mummy character. Like you can do that. You just do it long enough since the movie's been around where you can reference the character in the film without having to go too deep in his origins.
Okay. Sorry. Like kind of unrelated. I just had a brain epiphany thing.
Okay.
Instead of Dracula's daughter starting World War I kind of thing, the Invisible Man did.
Ooh.
The Invisible Man is the Black Hand.
Oh, glory.
And they have to hunt down the Black Hand. But they are unable to stop the beginning of World War I.
I really like the idea of a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen kind of idea.
I mean, yeah, to an extent.
But where you're getting all these different characters and lore together in different ways. In League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, there's lots of betrayal, and not everyone's on the same page, and there's a lot of distrust between them. The Immortal has his painting stolen, and then he gets betrayed because his painting stolen. There's a lot of this, give or take. The film is not quite, it doesn't quite hit the comic like its tone.
Yeah.
very well. But the idea of it, like in a monster universe, would be really fun. Where you have some of the monsters are good guys, some of the monsters are bad guys. It's just the monsters themselves. Mm-hmm. The monsters themselves are the characters, and you don't know where they're going.
Yeah,
and that would just be really fun. Like and we went totally different directions. I stuck with the modern motif. You went more with the original time period. But either way, just it would be really cool to see all these monsters interact with each other in interesting ways.
Yeah.
To see, like, imagine Dracula and the wolf fighting, and then the people being like, oh, he's on our side. And like, no, they just hate each other. Like this idea where the monsters are all killing each other and fighting each other, and there's no necessary loyalties, and the organization is just trying to contain it. Some of them they try to use. The ones they think they can use, they try to use. The ones they can't, they kill. And it's just... And you have some of the monsters working for them, like Hellboy, right?
Yeah.
Like some of the monsters are working for them against the other monsters. Heck, Heroes would be a good example of that. The organization where like it's one of them and one of us. I don't know if you've ever seen Heroes. So in Heroes, one of the big things about Heroes is it's one of them and one of us. One of the people with powers and a person without powers are partnered together to do agent stuff. And it turns out that the agency is actually run by superpowered people that have had it way longer than everybody else. And it's just an interesting premise. Like that would be really cool. Like premise, like the organization is actually run by monsters, but it's like benevolent monsters that are trying to fight. It's also that duality, right? Who's the real monster? The monsters are on the outside, the monster on the inside. Some of the monsters are real monsters. Dracula is a real monster. The Invisible Man is a real monster. But then you may like the creature of the Black Lagoon might be benevolent. Frankenstein's monster might be on the edge. We don't really know what he is. You know, some of them are going to be. That would just be an interesting dynamic to see a universe full of monsters going at it. Monsters vs. Aliens did a better job of this premise. Like they took creatures and had them, use them as weapons. Like you could take some of those premises, those ideas, and do a darker theme of it, and have the true gore darkness of Dracula, the Invisible Man, the Wolf Man, and you could do that, but do them with more. But do them all in the same universe with more moral grayness between the actions of the characters. Yeah,
for sure. There's a lot of things that you could possibly do with that too. Like, okay, but like another thing that you could throw in too is like take an obscure character and make them a prevalent character.
Yeah,
like think about Dracula's daughter. We literally just watched it, so it's kind of like on my mind, but. Maybe they make an organization or they become a part of an organization later on in my series. Maybe it's like World War I happens and they make a society to prevent, the monsters from creating.
But you can have Dracula's daughter be the head of the organization.
That's what I was getting.
Yeah.
She's the head of the organization. Nobody knows.
You make the one that you think would be the most villainous the head of it, and like her second in command is Jacqueline Hyde. Like, you think he's in charge of it, but it's actually her, would be an interesting twist.
And all along, the person pulling the strings was the Phantom of the Opera. I don't know. Like
that's the kind of stuff that would be really fun and interesting. Like, different ways to do it. I would love to... A modern take on these characters in a universe where they all exist would be... That's all you have to do. Yeah, take fun. All the characters from the Universal Monster films, throw them in the same universe, in the same timeline, and be like, how would they interact with each other? Van Helsing, that's one of the things that one did really well.
Van Helsing is a very fun film.
Van Helsing gets the dynamic between the monster and the wolf. And like they're all antagonistic. Like the wolves are controlled by Dracula, but they don't like each other, and the monster doesn't like. None of them like each other. None of them get along, and they're all enemies. And then Van Helsing's thrown in this mix, and you just have this like massive like juxtaposition of all these different characters that don't jive together, and you don't really know who's good or bad throughout a lot of the film as you learn. Oh, Frankenstein's monster is actually a nice guy. He's a monster on the outside, but he's good. Dracula is just wicked. He's suave and heavily outside, but is a monster.
Actually, absolutely insane.
Yeah, and then the wolf is just a pawn in this. It's just an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
You could have taken that, and then you have the mummy, which is like just a force of nature that comes into it. And then, the mummy powers goes to somebody else. And you're like, well, that's a new dynamic. Now there's a different mummy. Is he good or bad? Who knows? Like, just, it's so much more interesting if you were kept on your toes. Because it's not like, it would be so different than Marvel. Where Marvel is like, you know who the heroes and the villains are. They're named. In the universe, you don't know who you can trust. Who's good? Who's bad? Who's going to turn? Who's going to betray who? Anything can happen.
Well, yeah, and it's like each
Dracula could turn out actually being a good guy, and he's actually against Nosferatu, who's even worse than him, and he was misunderstood, and his daughter's evil. You could, it's just an example. Like, turns out Dracula was actually a good guy. His daughter was with Nosferatu, and they were different characters, and she's working with him. She's running the organization for him, and they turn on him. And turns out Dracula's like, I was misunderstood. I'm not the bad guy here. And then, like, him and the mummy team up to take down the organization that's full of monsters now. Like, there's 1,000 twists you can do in a universe like that and keep that gore. Because the mummy did that right. 2017 the mummy was awesome.
I love the shots. Like, so many of the shots in the 2017 Mummy were so well done. It's a shame it was wasted on such a bad film.
Agree.
But yeah, anyway, we probably could have turned this into a 2-part thing, but we'll just go with it for now. In the future, we are going to try to do 30-minute, 45-minute podcast episodes. So we're sorry that we went a little bit long. If you are still with us, we appreciate you guys so much for listening to this. Let us know in the comments what you think about the Dark Universe. What do you think about our ideas? What are some things that you would have liked to see? And would you like to see, just in general, would you like to see this Universal dark universe come back to life or begin again in a way? Let us know in the comments. Otherwise, please like this video, share it with your friends, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. And you can check us out as well on Facebook at Entertainment Rebooted. We actually make posts kind of similar to this vein of thought, where we run into an idea and we kind of do a little quick synopsis of an idea, and we put that on Facebook every now and then. Or check us out on Twitter at ExpositionSickle. Otherwise, we will see you guys in the next video.
Thanks for listening.